In this video, we're going to be breaking down the 5 players that you need to be trading away in fantasy football before they fall and crash back down to earth. Now, it doesn't mean that these players are bad, but it means that they're not going to be able to sustain their current production. You might as well ship them off for a better player. And this first one is a tricky one. It's an interesting one because this player hasn't played this season, and it's Nick Chubb, who recently began practicing just last week. He ended up practicing. The internet kind of went crazy for a day or so because Nick Chubb is officially somewhat back. And not only did he just return to practice, right? You can see right here coming off of the gruesome knee injury, but every single week leading up to, or every single day leading up to week 5, you get a limited participation Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Ultimately, he was ruled out in the game. It wasn't expected that he would play in this game, but the fact that he was practicing every single day last week was an encouraging sign. He seemed happy, the team seemed happy, and it was just a feel-good moment that Chubb had returned from such a bad injury. Because make no mistake about it, this was an injury that Nick Chubb suffered last year, as you can see right here, a dislocated knee, a torn MCL. He had a bunch of other ACL, meniscus injuries. Everything went wrong for this knee the second time he had such a major injury, and this is something that realistically could have taken 18 to 24 months to fully come back from, and he did it in basically a year, 13 months or so. So this is great to see, and if we go to Sports MD Analysis on Twitter right here, you'll see that he believes Nick Chubb is likely to return in week 6 or week 7. By the time that you're watching this video, when it releases on Friday morning, then yeah, you might actually see Nick Chubb playing in week 6, if not week 7. He suggests a slow ramp up of about 4 games. Data suggests a major efficiency dip initially, and this makes sense because the guy has been away from football for over a year as an older running back and now has suffered the second catastrophic knee injury of his career. So even though Chubb could be close to returning right now, again, he's almost 29 years old and it could take weeks for him to ramp up to a relevant workload. Now, I'm not really concerned with any of his current competition in this backfield because Jerome Ford hasn't really done anything, not really because of his fault. The offense has not been great, but Ford, not the flashiest of players. Deontay Foreman has been involved in 2 out of 5 weeks so far, so it's kind of this messy backfield where no one is taking charge, and Nick Chubb can, of course, with his name value and his proven success in the past, come right back in and command the workload in this backfield, or could he? Because Nick Chubb returning to the practice field or even returning to a game doesn't mean that he's instantly his former self. I think there's some realistic questions that we have to ask ourselves about how this multi-ligament knee injury will affect him. We've seen it in the past with guys like J.K. Dobbins, with guys like Javonte Williams. They don't come back the same player. A clean ACL tear, just an ACL tear, sure, you can come back from that and be a fine player. We're talking about Breece Hall, we're talking about Saquon Barkley in the past, but when other things are involved, it becomes complicated. And even if he was to come back and be the same old Nick Chubb somehow at the age nearly 29, which I doubt, but if it did happen, he's running behind the 31st ranked offensive line in the NFL right now. It's banged up, it's bad, it's not good. The offense in general as well, led by Deshaun Watson right now, looks terrible. Maybe Deshaun Watson gets benched at some point if this continued, you would assume so, for Jameis Winston, but they do have a lot of money invested in Deshaun Watson, and although I do like Jameis Winston in terms of making Amari Cooper fantasy relevant in overall fantasy football, like production for Amari, I'm not sure he lifts everybody, including the running backs on this team. So I think we're in a unique position where Nick Chubb hasn't even stepped on the field, but his value is skyrocketing because he's practicing and he has that name value. The second he steps on the field and is in a limited role for a month or more, well, then he loses that value. So in my opinion, I think it's worth trading Nick Chubb right now, who as of this recording did not make my top 100 players for the rest of the season, which means any of these guys I would trade Nick Chubb for. He's currently my 108th overall player. So if you can get Josh Downs for him, who I think is the best wide receiver on the Colts right now, you can go ahead and do that. If you can trade him 1-for-1 for guys like, Jacoby Myers, who might see a bigger role in this offense now that you can see Devontae Adams getting traded is what it seems like. Heck, you could even shoot for the stars and go George Pickens, Rashid Shaheed, just based off of Nick Chubb's name value alone. Now, the next guy I want to talk about is another Cleveland Brown adjacent running back. He's a former Cleveland Brown running back, and this is Kareem Hunt, who had a strong showing. A strong showing, not just only in week 5, but in prime time on Monday Night Football. Everybody saw it, so now his stock is skyrocketing, at least in fantasy football specifically. And in week 5, you'll see that he played a massive 50 snaps. They ran 80 plays in this game. It was insane. The Chiefs were running so many plays. That was 60% of the snaps on the team, handled 75% of the rush attempts in this game. When you factor out Mahomes' carries and a couple of wide receiver end arounds, it was 84% of the RB carries Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt had this past week. He was the clear workhorse. And in this game, you saw Carson Steele was the only other running back, the undrafted rookie out of UCLA, to have a carry. He had 5 carries, but he fumbled yet again. I mean, there's just no way that they can trust this guy moving forward. That's a concern for him. If we were to go back to the usage in this game, you would see that Nick Chubb ran 43% of the routes. That was the most on the team. But here's the concern. Nick Chubb, I think I said it again. Let's get this through our heads. It is Kareem Hunt, people. All right, there we go. Now, Kareem Hunt only had 3% of the targets. Now, this is a guy who's known for his pass catching abilities in the past with the Browns, with the Chiefs back in his heyday when he was first entered the NFL. 3% of the targets, maybe it's just a one-game sample, but if you watch this game, you know that this is not the same Kareem Hunt as past years. He's not going out there and dominating guys. He's picking up 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 yard carries. But all of those carries added up this past week because, like I said, they ran 80 plays, which led to a 27 rush attempt game when the Saints could not do anything on offense. Then Derek Carr went down, so 28 total touches with his reception. He ends up going for 117 total yards and a touchdown. And on the week in fantasy, he's the running back too. Who knew in week 5 of fantasy football, the RB1 would be Tank Bigsby, 2 Kareem Hunt, and 3 DeAndre Swift, just like we all planned it out. But right now, Kareem Hunt is coming off of his best performance of the season through these first 2 games, and probably is my guess the best performance he'll have when we look back on the entire year was this week. So now if we pull up Fantasy Life right here, you'll see now through 2 games this season, what are you getting? You're getting a 60% snap share for Kareem Hunt, and he's earned 67% of the backfield carries. That is a very strong role. Samaje Perine is basically not involved at this point, running a couple of routes here and there. Carson Steele is involved for a couple of carries a game like we mentioned earlier, but Carson Steele with multiple fumbles already this year, I'm not sure how much they can really go back to him. So as it stands right now, you're getting Kareem Hunt with this great role, a role where he's seeing 20 plus touches now, or averaging 20 plus touches through 2 games. Yeah, that's going to be valuable to some people. But I do want to point this out right here. As I mentioned earlier, the Chiefs ran 80 offensive plays, as Brandon Kiley points out on Twitter. It was their most in a game since December 20th of 2020. So we're looking at nearly 4 years since the Chiefs had this type of offensive output in terms of plays run. That's not going to happen again, which is going to contribute to less overall plays for all the running backs, receivers, targets, volume, all that, meaning Kareem Hunt's 27 carries aren't repeatable. And not only are they not repeatable, I think you would probably assume he's not going to average 27 carries a game, but I think probably closer to like 12 to 14 carries a game is what you're going to see when the Chiefs get back to running in the 60s of plays, when we start to see Isaiah Pacheco come back, which, by the way, according to SportsMD Analysis on Twitter, he recently put this out this past week. He's leaning towards Pacheco coming back in week 10. Now, there's a chance that Pacheco can come back in week 9 based on average returns from this type of an injury. So week 9 to 12, but he's saying week 10. That's not that far away. We're talking a month away. So if SportsMD Analysis, if indeed Deepak is right, a Harvard-trained surgeon, if he's even close to being right, it's week 9, 10, or 11, well, you're getting like 4 more starts out of Kareem Hunt. He's going to be on bye in week 6. Then you get week 7, 8, 9, and maybe 10 if Isaiah Pacheco still isn't back. So realistically, it could be 2 more starts, maybe 3 or 4 more starts out of Kareem Hunt, and then he's just not really involved as much as he is right now. So after this big game, it's likely that a lot of people are going to value Kareem Hunt in a Patrick Mahomes-led offense as a hot commodity. He's not even in my top 100 players because I think he's only going to be the starting running back on this team for 2 to 4 more weeks and not see anywhere near the amount of volume, and I don't think he has all that much juice right now. So I would trade him 1-for-1 easily for Dontavian Wicks. Trade him 1-for-1 easily for his teammate Isaiah Pacheco, who should be back in a month or so, which again is not that far away. You can shoot for the stars and go for Ladd McConkey, who's returning from his bye week. Rome Odunze off of a lackluster or mediocre 5-catch, 40-yard game. These are the guys you should go and try and sell and engage interest on in a sell high for trade on Kareem Hunt. And by the way, this tool is my rest of season rankings. You can call it the trade tool. Either way, it just helps you know the value of players the rest of the season and for trades. And it could be acquired by you if you would like to see it, along with all of my other tools that I have every week: waiver wire tiers, projections and rankings, matchup notes, all of that and more. 20,000 people just got access to it today, and you can as well in my Fantasy Blueprint. The Fantasy Blueprint has all the tools you need to make the playoffs, to smack around your competition. And as you can see right here, there's just 2 simple steps to go ahead and get it through one of our partners this year. We have Underdog as a partner. We have Better as a partner. When you sign up through one of our partners, that's important because a couple of things. It becomes risk-free through one of our partners. Meaning if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, your one-time payment of $10 when you deposit and play through a partner, that's important play as well, it gets refunded if you don't make your fantasy playoffs. So if you want to join the 20,000 people who currently have the tools that I use for all my fantasy leagues, you can scan the QR code on the screen, just follow those steps, or click the link in the description below. It'll take you to the same place to get those tools to smack around your league mates with. Now, this next guy I'm going to come up, it might be a little controversial, but hear me out on Zay Flowers, who finally had a big week this past week for the Baltimore Ravens. Zay Flowers goes out there and in week 5 runs 87% of the routes. That was a season high. Sees a 29% target share. That was also a season high because it led to 12 total targets in this game. Now, those 12 total targets, what does it lead for Zay Flowers? Well, you can see right here his biggest game of the season against the Cincinnati Bengals in a game that became a shootout. 7 catches, 111 yards. You factor in his rush attempt, this dude put up 120 total yards, 22 fantasy points. All of this is fantastic to see. And not only that, but we saw season high usage for Zay Flowers downfield. On average, his average depth of target was 10.7 yards downfield instead of being like 7 or 8 yards downfield. So it's pretty clear and obvious that Zay Flowers is number 1 receiver on this team. I don't really have to tell you that. Mark Andrews is not having the best usage or season, coming off of an injury from last year and a car accident this summer. I'm sure that's factoring in. A lot of people don't want to bring those things up, but I'm sure that's factoring in since he's a human being and Those are serious things. And then Rashad Bateman's out there like, yeah, Zay Flowers is obviously the number one wide receiver in this, but I have a couple of issues and a couple of concerns with this production staying consistent moving forward. The first one is we know the Ravens want to be this run first team. The only times that they really weren't were in week 1 against the Chiefs when they fell behind against the Chiefs, who were 5-0 and a defending back-to-back Super Bowl champions, right? So they were forced to throw. And then you can see all the way back here against the Ravens or against the Bengals in an overtime game where they were forced to throw to keep up in a game where both teams put up 35 plus points. So like these outcomes of these shootouts, they've happened 2 times in 5 games, but they're probably not going to happen the majority of the time if you look forward at their schedule, at least not to that extent where Lamar is throwing 40 plus times. Because that's what you got in week 5. You got Lamar throwing 42 times, and he looked like MVP Lamar Jackson, 348 yards. Obviously, he does some things on the ground as well with 55 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. Like this was a massive performance for Lamar Jackson, and when we look back on it, it will probably be his best performance of the entire season is my overall guess. Now, on one hand, the Ravens do have the ability to explode, like we just saw this past week with Lamar, Zay Flowers, and the rest of their weapons. And also, it should be noted that their secondary is not as good this year. They've lost pieces in this offseason. Some players are just regressing right now. They have the 23rd ranked secondary this year, which could lead to some shootouts moving forward. You look at their upcoming schedule this week against the Commanders. Commanders are putting up a lot of points on offense. That could be a shootout. On the road against the Tampa Bay Bucks. That's a situation where we can see a high scoring game. But then quickly after that, you're in a spot where the Browns offense doesn't look good. And a spot against a good Broncos defense where they're not really getting into shootouts right now. All I'm trying to say is I don't know how many more times Lamar is going to throw 40 plus times this year. Most weeks it's probably going to be between 25 and 30 pass attempts. And when that happens, you're getting a good game out of Zay Flowers being like 4 catches for 50 yards and maybe he finds the end zone. So I'm kind of incentivized to sell him. Now here's the thing. I'm not going to blame you if you don't want to sell him this week when he's a home favorite against the Commanders, who have a bottom 5 secondary this year and are just leaking points to fantasy wide receivers. But after this week, and maybe even before, if you want to sell him off his 20 plus point performance, well, I'm fine to go ahead and sell Zay Flowers for somebody who can maybe just give you more consistent performances. And that's the whole thing here. We're not trying to sell him for a bag of donuts. We're trying to sell Zay Flowers for somebody who's actually valuable. Zay Flowers is a borderline top 50 player for me right now. He'd be a 5th round pick if we redrafted. I think that's a valuable piece. If you can 1-for-1 trade him for David Montgomery coming off of his bye, I would do that. Brian Thomas, the exciting rookie, I would do that. T. Higgins, who's had back-to-back nice games, might be tougher to do that right now, but I think maybe your best bet is a guy like David Montgomery, maybe a Brian Thomas. Go out there and trade and buy those guys and sell high on Zay Flowers. And I also think right now you could probably sell high on Rhamondre Stevenson, who now so far this season, if we pull up his game logs through the first 5 games of the year, he has 3 top 12 finishes. Week 1, 21.6 points, 17 points in week 2. Had a top 5 finish, his best game of the season relative to other running backs on the week. The bye weeks help with that, of course. 19.2 fantasy points, was a number 4 running back on the week. Now, honestly, overall, yeah, for fantasy, he's put up good production this season. Stevenson currently ranks 3rd in broken tackles this season and is averaging over 19 opportunities per game. That's a strong role with some strong efficiency. And even though there were rumors that he wasn't going to start, and he didn't this past week, people took that as he was going to be benched. No, he just didn't start. He went out there, only played 50% of the snaps because he didn't start and get the opening drives, but he goes out, he sees 67% of the rush attempts. He still operates as the clear number 1 back, totaling 12 carries, 4 catches, so 16 touches, 92 yards and a touchdown in a matchup against Miami, which wasn't one of the best matchups you can find. So all of this is great. He produced for you last week. Maybe he helped you win a week as a top 5 running back, but there are some issues. I mean, first off, this guy's offensive line is still terrible. That's the whole reason why it took so long for Drake May to actually get a start, which he'll do in week 6. The 29th ranked run blocking, when you just look at run blocking specifically, is what we're getting here. And on the season right now, Rhamondre Stevenson currently has picked up 267 of his 353 yards, so that's 75% of his yards after contact. He's getting no help before contact right now. Now, the reason why this is an issue is when he's not breaking tackles or just facing a team that can tackle better like he did in week 3 for this specific matchup against the Jets on a short week. Well, what do you get? 6 carries, 23 yards for Rhamondre Stevenson. The dude picks up 1 point. He fumbled in this game, which is something that he did in every single one of his games the first 4 weeks, which again is the reason he didn't start in week 5. And it's still a thing. Like if he goes out there and fumbles in week 6, then there's a real chance he gets benched for fumbling 5 times in 6 games. Now, we did get some news that Drake May is going to start, and I do think this is good news. Like for Drake May's development, I don't think it's good news to put him behind a terrible defensive line back or an offensive line back there and not give him any support in his weapons like Jalen Polk and who else you have out there? Demario Douglas. Like these guys aren't going to be game changers for you, but maybe he is the next Josh Allen. Maybe he is this great quarterback who can just kind of overcome all the adversity. And if that's the case, it will open up some things for this offense that will get to the red zone more and also open up some running lanes because defenses won't load the box against Rhamondre. Now, of course, that is wishful thinking, at least to some extent. It's probably not the likely outcome that he's Josh Allen, right? But as you can see here, the Patriots are at home this week, but they're 7-point underdogs. Not a great spot for a running back to be in. There is an argument that Rhamondre Stevenson, though, as an underdog in the past with Mac Jones, did find success on getting checkdowns, would catch 4 or 5 balls, maybe even 6+ in some games. And that's a possibility here. But I'm just way more comfortable trying to sell high and not risking him in his first start with a rookie quarterback as a big underdog, I'm in a better situation that I can just sell him off this 19-point game, a top 5 finish. He's had 3 games that are good in 5 weeks. If your trade partner is looking at the box scores, he's my 83rd overall player the rest of the season. 1-for-1 trades for Rhamondre or Ladd McConkey for me right now are something that I immediately want to do. Scroll up a little more, maybe even get a better player. George Pickens off a bad week with some bad media around him not running his routes, and Mike Tomlin maybe being mad at him or benching him for a drive or two, right? Tank Dell is maybe somebody you can get, although the Nico Collins IR news may make that a little harder. Regardless, I am looking to sell Rhamondre Stevenson. It doesn't mean I'm trying to sell him for nothing. Make sure you get better value in return or fair value. And before we get into this next wide receiver who just exploded this week and it's the perfect time to sell him, here we go. The gentleman's agreement, we're shaking on it. 64% of you are not subscribed to this channel. That means right now 64% of you watching this, if you just take 2 seconds, you made it to this point in the video, you find the video helpful, entertaining, engaging, whatever it might be, help you in your fantasy league. Well, the whole point right now is the gentleman's agreement. You get all that help, and just in return, all you got to do is hit the subscribe button. Appreciate it a ton. It takes a lot to make these videos, 6-7 hours for each video. So if you can hit that subscribe button, it goes a really long way. Now, that wide receiver who just popped off this past week is Darnell Mooney, and he didn't just pop off, fellas and ladies. He absolutely exploded in week 5 on Thursday Night Football. We all saw it in prime time. A great game against the Tampa Bay Bucks where so much offense was there. Overtime game. You get 30% target share for Darnell Mooney in this one. I think I said 30% target share was a team high. Yeah, a team high. We talked about it earlier this week when discussing Drake London and the waiver wire pickups, and Darnell Mooney was the top of that list, still available in over 50% of leagues at that time. Well, Darnell Mooney in that game, he turned that great usage into a big day. 16 targets. The reason I brought up Drake London and discussing him was earlier in the week in the waiver wire video, we said Drake London left for a drive or two, getting his head evaluated. So that's where Darnell Mooney scored one of these 2 touchdowns, had a couple of receptions and targets, but for the most part, this was legit production with Drake London in the game for most of it. It was just like 2 drives, if that London was out for. And it could have been an even bigger day because Darnell Mooney dropped a wide open 20 to 25 yard catch that he easily just had to beat one defender to score a touchdown on. We showed it earlier in the week. Look at this. I mean, this is just crazy right here. You'll watch Darnell Mooney, middle of the field, wide open. You probably remember this play. Look at this. The cornerback slips. The cornerback slips right here. He slips. He's sliding on ice. If Darnell Mooney catches that ball, there's a decent chance, at bare minimum, he's picking up 25 yards. And there's a decent chance he hits the sideline, maybe makes one move, and he's getting the rest of the 10 yards for another touchdown. So when you're talking about trying to trade him, make sure you tell your trade partner about that play too. Like, this dude was open all night, could have had even another score. And on the season, he's been consistent right now, coming off of a week where he scored an insane 30 points. Will definitely be his best performance, is my guess, on the entire year. The number 3 wide receiver on the week, but he's also had a top 20 finish right here, a top 30 finish with 14 fantasy points. 3 out of 5 games now, he scored at least 14.5 fantasy points. That's a great option for you, especially with the bye weeks here. This is a reliable player who can be a flex option for many people right now. And it just goes to show you that Darnell Mooney was not in a good situation with the Bears the last 2 years, and Justin Fields and the offensive coordinators that they had coming through there. He was not set up for success on a run-first offense, and now in a pass-first offense, he seems to be pretty much having all the success he wants. And this next week, it could continue. It could continue as he goes to the road against the Carolina Panthers, who currently allow the 2nd most passing yards per play this season. It's a nice environment for him. You look at the point total on this one, 47 points for this season, 2024. That's a lot of points in a game, especially when the Falcons are the 6-point favorites. They're projected to score 25 plus points this week. All of this is good for Darnell Mooney. Why are we trading him, Sal? Well, how many times is he going to drop 16 targets? How many times is he going to have 9 catches in a game? Odds are you're not going to get Kirk Cousins throwing for 500 yards and 50 plus pass attempts in every single game, going to overtime, and them realizing they could dominate the Bucs through the air and it wasn't working on the ground. Like, that's not going to happen in every matchup. And I think we also know, based on all the underlying usage on first read target shares in the way that they're using these guys, that Drake London's the priority in this offense. Like, that shouldn't shock anybody. You all know that. He's the priority on first read targets. He's the priority on the X wide receiver, all the schemed up plays you're getting right now. Mooney's still up there. Don't get me wrong. He's still getting a lot of schemed up production, but he's not ever going to be the number 1 receiver, in my opinion, on this team. And look, it's not like your friends think he's the number 1 receiver on this team, but when they go and look at the fantasy scores and they see that he's a top 25 receiver this year, coming off of a 30-point fantasy day, you might be able to buy him for something that's more valuable than it was a week ago. Because recency bias is a real thing. Darnell Mooney, despite this big performance, is still just my 92nd player for the rest of the season. I go up, I would much rather have Chase Brown, and you're going to maybe sit there and your friends will be like, there's no way. Chase Brown didn't have 30 plus points, right? It's recency bias. We're talking about the rest of the season. I would rather have, I keep saying his name, Ladd McConkey coming out of the bye. I think he could see a massive uptick coming out of the bye week. I'd much rather have guys like, I don't know, Tony Pollard coming out of the bye week, who hasn't had an explosion week yet, but a lot of great usage. Rhamondre, I keep saying his name because he's a rookie that I want to buy into as the season goes on. All these guys, or some of these guys, you might be nodding your head like, no way, Darnell Mooney's been great this year. He just popped off. And he has been, and that is true. He did just pop off. But it's not about what he just did. It's about consistency moving forward. That's probably not going to happen again. You might as well sell him for a more stable asset. Now, the next guy I want to talk about is a running back, and it's Javonte Williams, who really, since the second half of that poor bad weather game in week 2 against the Jets, we're really starting to see Javonte Javonte hit his stride these last 6 quarters or so. And we could specifically look at those last 2 games on Fantasy Life right here. In week 4 and week 5 combined, you're getting Javonte playing 60% of the snaps, handling 52% of the rush attempts, but specifically when you look at the running back carries on this team, he's handling 64% of the running back carries. That's strong usage. And also Tyler Bidet is a running back who's getting serious usage in week 5, in week 4, now he's hurt. Now this solid usage the past 2 weeks led to, in week 4 in that bad weather game against the Jets, him putting up 80 total yards, 10 fantasy points on a nice 18 touches. And then this past week, he had the best game of the season. 13 carries, 5 receptions, that's 18 total touches. He goes for 111 total yards, 16 fantasy points. So he tops 100 yards in this game. And overall for him, not a bad day at the office, but it was also a great matchup against the Raiders. We can't forget about that. Like on Yahoo's Fantasy Football Live last week, I had to have a player that I was going to be the bye week blues player, running back that you must start this week, and it was Javonte Williams, specifically because of his matchup. The Raiders heading into that matchup allowed the 3rd most rushing yards per game and were a bottom 10 overall defense. So I mentioned Tyler Bidet got hurt in that game, so that kind of helped Javonte have a bigger role and look better because Bidet was having serious work in week 4 before getting hurt. And this past week, he seems to at least secured the role a little bit more away from Jaleel McLaughlin. We can pull that up on Fantasy Life right here. You can see Javonte Williams in week 5, 60% of the snaps, sees 50% of the backfield carries, but when you factor out some of the other touches in this game, he was seeing over 60% of the backfield carries. When you factor in his targets, which he had 5 in this game, he earned 68% of the team's running back opportunities. That was his highest on the season, but gang, I'm still concerned for multiple reasons. First off, we've hinted at it a couple of times. Tyler Bidet at the beginning of week 4 in the first quarter was earning serious snaps before getting hurt. He was phasing out, to some extent, Javonte Williams. And Audric Estime, the 5th round rookie that all off season, Sean Payton, the head coach, was just praising him for how big, fast, and powerful he was. Well, he just opened up his practice window to return to play within probably the next 21 days. So those are 2 issues from a competition standpoint. And also this past week when he went over 100 yards, when he had by far his best game of the year, it was against the Raiders, who we told you earlier, coming into that week and then leaving that week, were one of the worst run defenses in general, I should say. And it was just a matchup where running backs have been exploiting all week long. So it's kind of good that he was able to take advantage of them, but he's not going to have these matchups moving forward. Matchup this week against the Chargers, top 5 run defense. Matchup against the Saints, top half of the league run defense. Then a good one against the Panthers, I will say that, but then a matchup against the Ravens, who allowed the fewest rushing yards per play and per game this season. Not a great schedule upcoming for Javonte. And at some point in there, you could get Tyler Bidet back. At some point in there, you could see Audric Estime make his debut as Sean Payton favorite right now. And at that point, well, now what is Javonte Williams? Maybe a split backfield back again? So I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know the value of Javonte Williams for your league mates right now. I don't know how you view him. He's my 111th overall player. I'd take guys like Rico Dowdle. I'd take guys like Josh Downs ahead of him. Isaiah Pacheco for sure. Khalil Shakur would be a great trade target. And you might be sitting there going, nobody wants Javonte Williams. No. You don't want Javonte Williams maybe. All it takes is one person in your 10 to 12 man league to want him, and you have an offer. You have a deal that could be made, and you can improve your team. All it takes is one person. So don't be going in with that negative mindset. So these have been the players that you should trade away before week 6 begins. But if you want to see some other players, we talked about some in this video that you should target in those trades for them. Well, here's the running back trades video and the wide receiver trades video for this week. Hope you enjoy those videos. Enjoy your weekend as well. Enjoy all the week 6 games, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one.